Welcome back. So today we will discuss about some exercises related to breathing and exchange of gases. So now since there are some important thing which was left during the discussion of this chapter, and so we will try to cover this small terminology and details, and also we will try to repeat some of this stuff in order to better get an understanding of those terminology which are associated with this exchange of gases and breathing aspect. So let's start with the first question, which will start with the anatomical aspect. So let's start with anatomy, then we'll move to the functional aspect, and then some disease also of course we'll cover. The whole idea is to get a better understanding in order to do some exercises, which is important in terms of understanding our previous 3 lectures in this current topic. So let's see the first question in the slide. So the question is, the left lung in humans is slightly smaller as compared to the right one, and what is the reason behind this? It's oftenly asked question that why the left lung is slightly smaller as compared to the right lung. And the probable, I have just included some of the probable like hits to accommodate heart, to accommodate liver. It is just an exception, and provide more oxygen. Now, if we try to recall back our initial concept, so what we draw initially, that we have this lung, and I am just trying to draw the left lung, and this left lung roughly is like, then in the level of the bottom, around the bottom corner, we have this kind of small notch, and this notch is an area that is typically kind of giving an access to the heart. So this was sometime we discussed that this is called as cardiac notch, and this cardiac notch is nothing but the area that can give access to the heart tissue as such, the complete heart. And because of this depression, the size of the left lung is slightly smaller as compared to the right lung. So to cover this question, we will obviously get an idea that the location of heart is also towards the left side of our body. So left side of our body is having heart, and because of this region, the left lung is slightly smaller in size. Of course, the other choices accommodate liver, and it is an exception, and then also provide more oxygen is not pertinent. So the appropriate answer to this question is accommodate heart. So this is the right answer, just to get an extra space for the heart. Coming to the next question, this is often asked that what is epiglottis. Now, what is epiglottis? As name itself indicates, epi means on the top of glottis. Glottis is an area in the larynx, and above that area what you have is called epiglottis. Now, we are not concerned about much of the aspect related to the epiglottis, but why it is important is, in order to understand, we need to understand one thing, that suppose this is a larynx, this is just larynx area, which will be ultimately continuing into this tracheal ring like a structure which we call trachea. Suppose we are taking the food particle. Now, the food needs to enter through the esophagus. Now, this is another passage which is running parallel to the respiratory system, and we call it esophagus. Now, this esophagus is a food pipe. So, basically the food particle needs to go here. Now, suddenly if the food particle comes into this one, there will be a choking. There will be a problem in the respiratory passage. so to curtail this problem, we have this flap like structure. Now this flap is basically a hanging kind of flap. So once the food is coming, this flap is kind of covering this area in order to avoid any entry of this food particle into this passage, and this is called epiglottis. So epiglottis is a small flap like structure just to avoid the food entry or the particle entry or any unwanted entry into this respiratory passage which is coming from the mouth area. So this is important, and many times people are used to ask that what is epiglottis and what is the significance of this epiglottis in respiratory system. So one should know that the epiglottis and why it is important. Okay, let's move to the next question, and the next question is pleura. So what is pleura? And pleura is a membrane covering of, the question is like that. So I just rephrases the question, but we need to understand what is pleura. So we have discussed this thing, again I am just highlighting this point. So pleura is a membrane covering of lung. So basically we are discussing this, and this question may be asked one can ask this question in digestive system, maybe excretory system, reproductive system and all. So one has to understand this aspect in terms of the terminology. So the question is pleura. Pleura. Now I have given the 4 tentative options here: the heart, lung, kidney and brain, and the right answer is lung. So outer covering of the lung is called pleura. So suppose this is a lung. Now this outer covering, the covering of the lung, we called it pleura. Now this kind of protective mechanism, the protective covering, is available in many organs in the body. The human body, whole organ system is kind of protected by certain kind of covering. So suppose if we discuss about the heart, so suppose if we draw a rough heart. So this is the 4-chamber human heart roughly. Now we need to protect, this is a very delicate organ, and the injuries are quite possible in this area. So here we have another covering. So there is a nice covering of fibrous tissue which is kind of protecting this whole heart area. So because it is outside, so for lung it is very specifically called as pleura, but here because it is outside, outside is called peri. Peri means outside, periphery. So the root word is coming from periphery. Periphery means outside. So peri, and something which is related to heart we call it cardiac. So this is called pericardium. So pericardium or the pericardiac sac is an outer covering that is protecting the heart tissue for any external injury. This is the fibrous tissue, and this is covering the entire heart capsule, entire heart tissue in the form of a covering. The third option which I have given here is kidney. Now in kidney also we have the similar kind of some protective mechanism. So suppose we will draw here a kidney. So suppose this is a kidney, and this kidney is also having some kind of capsular structure in order to protect this one from external injury, because you have very delicate structures inside kidney that is called nephrons, and this nephrons is ultimate unit. Here also in lung we have alveoli, very delicate structure. Inside heart we have again cardiac muscle, which is again very delicate organ in order to do pumping of the blood and all. So this covering outside this capsular, the whole body of kidney is called renal capsule. We will discuss this again in the excretory system, but again since we are discussing this covering we need to understand. So for any kind of understanding we need to get the root word, proper root word. So this is renal capsule, which is kind of a covering of the kidney. Next in the slide I have mentioned brain. In the brain tissue also, So peri stands for periphery, and I am not going to discuss much about the terminology related to peri. We have outer covering of bone is called periosteum. So anything outside bone is called periosteum. If we have any cartilage, outside covering is called perichondrium, something like that. So peri stands for periphery. Now I just thought that I will give an insight. This is not important here, but since these are included, this can be asked in any other system wise. I am saying maybe in the nervous system or other places, the question can be asked in this way. So suppose if we draw roughly brain, so suppose this is brain tissue. Now this brain is also a very, very delicate organ, because any injury can lead to fatal kind of consequences in human being. So this is a very delicate organ. That's why it is covered under such a hard bony structure. But apart from this hard bony skull bone, you have another covering that is protecting this whole brain nicely from any external injury, and this outer covering of this brain is called meninges. So meninges is outer covering of brain tissue, these meninges. And if you try to recall, many times you will get meningitis. This meningitis is nothing but the problem in this outer covering of brain. So this is very common problem. Once you have a injury in the membrane, also you have a disease consequences. So meninges is just an outer covering. Of course, there are many layers in this meninges. There are 3 layers in these meninges: pia mater, dura mater, and arachnoid. Of course, we are not going to discuss much about the details of this one, but just to have a clear idea that what are the coverings. So pleura for lung, meninges for brain, pericardium for heart, and renal capsule for kidney. So this is regarding some anatomical feature pertaining to the organ wise. Next question in the slide here is regarding trachea. So if we try to discuss something related in trachea, one can see that it's lined by, if we see the 4 options, the most probable answer is lined by the hyaline cartilage. The second one, it terminates definitely, the trachea is going to terminate in bronchi, and the bronchi is going to branch out in bronchioles, which will ultimately end up in alveoli. It starts from, definitely it starts from larynx. So the downstream of the larynx is going to form a trachea, and it's sometimes also called as windpipe. So if you see the option, this is the right options. Just trying to recollect here. So if we have this trachea, the outer boundary, if we decide the boundary, so this is basically the bronchi. This is what is larynx. So these are all tracheal ring made up of cartilage, and then definitely this outer and inner boundary is important just to decipher that what are the actual area here. And since this is giving passage to the air, that's why it is called as windpipe. So we finished trachea. Next question is, what is vital capacity? Now as we will try to recollect our volume wise discussion in the second probable second lecture, when we discuss about the volume associated with the normal intake. So if we start, I am just trying to recollect the whole thing so that you can understand nicely what is vital capacity. So if we draw same kind of graph here, so this will be a time in the horizontal axis, and in the vertical axis we will just see that the volume. So we can simply say lung volumes. Now what we discussed, that we will do a normal breathing. So basically we are doing a normal breathing: inspiration, inspiration, expiration, inspiration, expiration, inspiration, expiration, and during some time we are doing forceful inspiration, and then normal breathing, inspiration, expiration. Then sometime we also do forceful expiration, So, some more volume of air is coming out during expiration, and then we have again normal breathing. So, if we try to recollect our knowledge, this normal volume which we are taking is generally approximately 500 ml. This extra volume which we are taking due to forceful inspiration, which we call inspiratory reserve volume, and this is what we call tidal volume. So, this inspiratory reserve volume is approximately 3000 ml, and this again doing normal breathing, and this is expiratory reserve volume, which is approximately 1100 ml. So, this is 1100 ml is again expiratory reserve volume. These are all approximation, and these variations are quite possible according to the health condition of that particular individual. These are just for a healthy human being of an average weight and all. And of course, we have a constant volume of air lying always in the chest cavity, in the lung cavity, and we called it residual volume, which is approximately 1200 ml. So, this is 4 volume wise: tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, and residual volume. If we combine 2 or 3 volume, we will get a capacity. That is what we discussed earlier, that these fancy terminologies are coined by the scientist, by the research worker, in order to facilitate some of the research work, or maybe in order to do certain kind of pathophysiological or physiological aspect of human body. So, what we know that volume is individual stuff, and then if you combine the volume, you call it capacity. So, what we are discussing here is what is vital capacity. So, vital capacity is nothing but the mixture of all these 3. So, if we add tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, and expiratory reserve volume, what we will get is called a vital capacity. So, we are discussing about the vital capacity. So, vital capacity is nothing but the tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, and expiratory reserve volume. If we add, this will come approximately 4600. So, 3000, 4000, 4500 and 100 is approximately 4600 ml is what we call vital capacity. And if we add this residual volume also, we call this one as total lung capacity. So, total lung capacity is 4600 plus 1200, which will give us approximately 5800 ml of air in the chest lung cavity, or we call it thoracic cavity. Now, this is all about the volume wise, and of course, these terminologies are quite common, and it has been it can be asked in various form. And one such example I just quoted here in the slide, that suppose we have residual volume, vital capacity, inspiratory reserve volume, and total lung capacity in one panel, and then you have different volume in the other panel. One can nicely give combination that the residual volume is approximately 1200 ml. That's what we discussed. Vital capacity is approximately 4600. Inspiratory reserve volume is approximately about 3000 reserve volume, that is above the normal tidal volume, and then total lung capacity is approximately 5800 ml. So, these all capacities and volumes are quite significant in terms of understanding the human physiological aspect, and any deviation from this volume and capacity can lead to various disease condition, and these parameters are quite commonly used by physician and clinician in order to understand what are the problem, where the actual problem is, if there is a fluctuation in any of these parameters. So, next in continuation to this one, I just noted down in one slide that we have two capacity, inspiratory capacity and expiratory capacity. This is nothing but the tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume, and the inspiratory capacity is about tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. So, if we add these two, we called it inspiratory capacity. If we add these two, we called it expiratory capacity. So, next one in the slide here is about the capacity. One is vital capacity and the total lung capacity. So, these are all terminology, and one can go nicely through each and everything, do some practice, and then you will nicely understand. This is not tough, it is very easy, but one has to understand what are these terminology, volume and capacity wise. So, let us go to the next slide. And in next slide also I just added these two again. So, inspiratory reserve volume, just try to avoid the volume aspect, but try to get an idea that the definition. So, inspiratory reserve volume is the maximum volume of air that can be inhaled after normal inspiration, and similarly maximum volume of air that can be exhaled after normal expiration is what we call expiratory reserve volume. And tidal volume is what volume of air inspired or expired during the normal respiratory process is what we call tidal volume. So, this is all about the volumes and the capacity and all, and one can nicely depict this whole thing. We have gone through this one again. If you recollect back, we discussed this whole terminology in chapters in quite detail. So, just do some practice and it will give you quite good idea about this volume and capacities. And in the next question, I just added this quite obvious question, that what happens to the respiratory process in a man going up a hill. So, if a person is going up a hill region, so if a person is climbing in the hill region, the oxygen tension gets reduced. So, the oxygen pressure is getting down when anybody is climbing to a hill region or slightly elevated position. Because of this lower oxygen content in the atmosphere, the partial pressure of O2 is also getting down. So, because of this partial decrease in partial pressure of O2 oxygen, what we are doing, the body is trying to compensate this process. So, because we are going in higher altitude, the respiratory process is kind of doing very fast breathing. So, respiratory rate is getting increased many-fold in order to compensate this loss in oxygen, because one cannot increase the RBC immediately. So, there is another option left out, that you do respiration fast, and because of this reason anybody going high altitude can show enhanced respiratory rate because of lower oxygen tension. So, basically these are all the summarized thing here. So, O2 is decreases going uphill because of O2 decline in blood. Body tends to compensate this loss by doing increased respiratory rate. And since we discussed this many times in the lectures also, and I am again trying to emphasize, this whole process is controlled by our medulla oblongata and pons. So, these are some of the consequences of going uphill. Now, the next question here is what is hypoxia? Now, I will try to give a definition here, and then we will see what is hypoxia, anoxia and asphyxia. So, here hypoxia stands for hypo means less, oxia means oxygen. So, less oxygen is what we call hypoxia. So, simply one can say decreased supply of oxygen to the lungs, or the decreased concentration of oxygen to the lung because of reduced partial pressure of oxygen or inadequate oxygen available in the atmosphere. So, this is what is called hypoxia. And simply if you remove hypo stands for less, if you remove hypo and add an, that's simply no. So, anoxia is what is called absence of oxygen. So, anoxia is basically no oxygen, hypoxia is what is less. Hypo means less. So, hypoxia stands for less oxygen. So, this is quite commonly quite commonly encountered problem in human physiology. So, one can always encounter a situation where the oxygen pressure is down and the condition is called hypoxia. Astrexia is another terminology. Here I just included, if body is deprived of oxygen, the body is not having enough oxygen concentration, we simply call it asphyxia. So, this is not to be confused, and that because there are a lot of terminology coming one by one. So, this root word is very important. So, anoxia and no, anoxia, hypo means less, anything hyper is more. So, hypo is less, hyper is more, A means no. So, anoxia no oxygen, hypoxia means less oxygen. So, if you see, because we I'm not going to discuss much of the detailed aspect about anoxia, but let us see, because it is there in the exercise also, what is hypoxia, and try to discuss what is hypoxia in little depth. So, different type of hypoxia I had just noted down here, anemic hypoxia, stagnant or ischemic hypoxia, histotoxic hypoxia and hypoxamic hypoxia. So, the terminology should not be confused in other sense, but we need to understand why these terminologies are very specific. So, in the next slide, if we go and see what is anemic hypoxia. So, anemic hypoxia is reduction in the concentration of hemoglobin. Anemia. So, if you see anemia, emia means blood. So, anything ends with emia is blood, anemia means no blood. So, if there is no blood, it partially indicating there is no RBC, less RBC in the blood or no RBC in the blood, which will indirectly correlating the hemoglobin concentration is less in the body. That means, anemia is a condition where the blood concentration, the whole blood volume, the whole blood picture is very less as compared to the normal one. So, if blood is less, there is less hemoglobin. If hemoglobin is less, there is less carrying capacity of oxygen. So, anything which is related to less of the blood, less of the hemoglobin is what we call anemic hypoxia. So, anything that is giving alteration to the oxygen concentration because of deviation in the blood volume picture is what we call anemic hypoxia here. So, anemic hypoxia is just a reduced concentration of hemoglobin. The next one is hypoxamic hypoxia. Hypoxamic, if we try to collect the root word, we are calling hypoxamic. So, this is hypoxamic. Emic stands for the blood, and then hypo is less, and we have ox in between. So, this is oxygen. So, less oxygen in blood. So, we are now saying less oxygen in the blood. We are not saying that hemoglobin concentration is down. We are just saying there is a decreased concentration of oxygen in blood leading to a hypoxic condition, leading to a decreased oxygen concentration in the blood, and because of this region we are called it hypoxamic hypoxia. So, hypoxamic hypoxia is nothing but the decreased concentration of oxygen in blood. So, reduced oxygen content of blood is what we call hypoxamic hypoxia. Next here is called stagnant or ischemic hypoxia. Now, in normal process, I am trying to simplify so that you can understand it nicely. So, suppose you have this organ, any organ, this organ is supplied through these blood vessels. So, this blood is carrying all the nutrients, oxygen, warmth and all the required information or required ingredients to sustain this organ properly in function. Suppose if it is a kidney, you have renal artery that is supplying blood. If it is heart or if it is any other organ, accordingly we have different kind of artery and the vein system that is giving supply to the blood or taking out the unwanted stuff from that organ. So, suppose if you are talking about this blood supply, now if this blood supply is regular, this organ is normal. Suppose if there is a hindrance here, anything that is stopping this flow of blood towards this organ, what will happen eventually? The whole blood supply will be kind of hampering here. The complete nutrient requirement and other kind of things are completely stopped. Now, because of this region, this particular organ is not getting supply of nutrients, oxygen or anything because of this hindrance, because of this problem in the blood vessel, and so because of this region the blood is not going to this organ. This condition is called ischemia. If we see the terminology, ischemia. Ischemia. So, emia again, anything ends with emia, you can just think that definitely blood is involved. So, ischemia is just a stoppage of blood towards this organ. Now, what is happening? If there is no blood supply, who will supply oxygen? So, there will be no oxygen supply, right? Because of this reason, the partial pressure of oxygen is down here, or the complete oxygen concentration is down here. Because of this region, this is called ischemic hypoxia or stagnant hypoxia, because the blood is stagnant here, and because of this region the oxygen supply is completely curtailed. So, this is another terminology in this. And then the next one is histotoxic. Histotoxic hypoxia. So, histotoxic hypoxia, again histo is the root word for tissue. Anything which is related to tissue, we call it histology. Histology is the study of tissue. So, the root word is histo. If there is a toxicity in the tissue is not getting much of the oxygen, and because of this region there is a hypoxamic condition. So, of course, that is not at all related with the lung function and all, but there is a problem in the tissue level as such. So, this is called hypoxia. Why? Because of there is a problem, there is a toxicity in the tissue level. So, this is called histotoxic hypoxia. So, tissue are unable to use oxygen content. So, these are 4: anemic, hypoxamic, ischemic and histotoxic, and accordingly we discussed about the root word, how this is involved in this one. So, basically these are nothing but some terminology associated with hypoxia. Next one, the question, the probable question is, what is oxygen dissociation curve? Of course, we have discussed this oxygen dissociation curve, and this curve is basically nothing but the oxyhemoglobin, saturation of the hemoglobin with oxygen at various partial pressure of oxygen. So, what is happening here is just a graphical representation. So, this graphical representation is the % saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen at different concentration of the oxygen. So, basically this is what discussed. So, this is % saturation of hemoglobin, and here we can simply say the partial pressure of O2. So, this graph is roughly sigmoid in nature. Now, if we see that one hemoglobin can bind maximum to 4 oxygen atom, so oxygen molecule. So, hemoglobin can bind to approximately 4 oxygen molecule, but this is not one time. The binding of one oxygen will be first, and then second, then third, and then fourth subsequently. But the binding of one oxygen will eventually increase the second binding, will increase further third binding, will ultimately increase the fourth binding, like that. So, initially there will be a binding which will be increasing again the uptake binding, but then the maximum capacity is 4. So, there will be a saturation. So, during certain partial pressure, the oxygen completely higher concentration, the complete blood is completely saturated with oxyhemoglobin. So, the percentage of, we can simply say hemoglobin percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. So, here the hemoglobin is getting saturated. So, if we see and try to dig out the terminology here. So, the curve shows equilibrium of oxyhemoglobin and hemoglobin at various partial pressure, and this partial pressure of oxygen is defining the binding capacity of the hemoglobin molecule, and the sigmoid shape of dissociation curve is because of the binding of oxygen to hemoglobin. And as I discussed, the first oxygen molecule binds to hemoglobin, it increases the affinity for the second molecule of oxygen to bind subsequently, and then further the hemoglobin attracts more and more oxygen, and so definitely the highest capacity is 4. So, there will be a complete saturation point after complete binding. So, this is about the oxygen dissociation curve, which we have discussed in the class. This is just to summarize the whole phenomena. Next in the slide, if you can look into that, we discuss the transportation of gases, and in transportation of gases we mainly discuss about the oxygen and hemoglobin transportation, and this oxygen and carbon dioxide, oxygen and carbon dioxide transportation, CO2 and O2, these two gaseous transportation is happening in the blood, and the blood comprises of the cellular part, which is called RBC, and the liquid part, what we call plasma. So, definitely these are the part of blood, and the blood is having two, the cellular part, what we call red blood cell, and the fluid part, the watery part, what we call is plasma. So, if you see in the slide, the transportation of O2 in blood is mainly done by two components, RBC and plasma. So, RBC is maximally involved in transporting this gaseous element, and O2 is 97% kind of volume is transported by RBC, and rest 3% is transmitted by transported by plasma. So, on an average 5 ml of oxygen per 100 ml of the blood is what is supplied to the tissue level. So, this is carrying capacity of the oxygen to the tissue, and if I draw an objective in this sense, just in order to understand that 1000 ml of the blood carries this amount of oxygen. So, 5 times multiplied by 10 is 50 ml is the right choice. So, 50 ml is the complete concentration of oxygen carried by 1 liter of blood, because 100 ml can carry 5 ml of oxygen. So, 1000 is basically 50 ml of oxygen. Next, the next gaseous element is carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide, just trying to summarize the whole story again, that blood is the ultimate area where the whole thing is gets transported. So, RBC is about 23% is what carried by RBC, then 70% by bicarbonate ion buffer, by bicarbonate ions, and plasma is what is least and 7%. So, 23, 70 and 7, these are different concentration of different parts of CO2 transportation by these three elements. Now, in total we have 4 ml of the CO2 is getting transported per 100 ml. So, second one can draw nicely a similar kind of question here, that 1000 ml of blood can carry how much amount of CO2. So, obviously 4 multiplied by 100, 4 multiplied by 10 is what we will get 40 ml. So, 40 ml of the complete CO2 is what we will get per 1000 ml of blood. So, we will try to discuss this one in later part regarding the once we will start circulatory system, we will learn more about the blood and all, but here it is main concern that how oxygen and carbon dioxide is getting carried. So, the next question here is, what is the site of gaseous exchange in an insect? And these are some of the questions which are asked in various examinations, and one has to understand, because we are concentrating ourselves the human lung. So, we need to understand some invertebrates how this exchange of gases takes place. So, if we try to draw that how this whole exchange of gases takes place in case of insect. So, if we will start with the body wall. So, suppose we have a body wall here, and then this body wall is having some opening, and this opening is continued into a channel, a tube like structure which is called spiracle. So, spiracles or spiracle is the tube like opening from outside. So, these are just body surface area, body wall. So, these are all body wall, body wall, body surface. So, this spiracle will eventually continue into a roughly tracheal like structure, we call it trachea, and this trachea is continued into a tracheole like. We are not calling it this is an actual trachea, but we are simply calling tracheoles. Tracheoles. So, this tracheole is what will there in the ultimate muscle. So, here the things are getting exchanged from the muscle level directly. So, from muscle the things are getting directly transferred and the exchanges are happening here. So, if you see in the slide what we are saying, the body wall is connected with spiracle, is continuing to trachea, trachea is continuing to tracheoles, and tracheoles is what is there in the muscle wall. So, what is getting here, the actual exchanges are happening in between tracheole. So, this is the site where the exchange of gases takes place here, because there is no as such lung and all. So, the actual exchange is taking place from tracheoles from the muscle wall, and then it is directly communicated from outside with the help of spiracle. So, this is what is there in the insect, most insect. Now, we have exception in all animal kingdom. Now, we have a very specialized structure what we discussed in our very first class, that in the terrestrial arthropods we have book lungs. Now, book lungs, if you see the structure of book lungs, so suppose we have here roughly, so these are the areas. These are all flap like structure. Now, these are nicely, the blood is draining into this sac, and we have this area where the air is coming. So, air is coming. So, because the blood and the air is running anti-parallelly, there is an exchange of gases here because of the very thin membrane here. Because these are like a flap, these are called as, these are like pages of book. So, that is why these are called as book lungs, because the function is quite similar as compared to what we know in lungs, exchange of gases. These are very thin wall, and since there is one passage of air, the other side the blood is coming, and because of this concurrent parallel anti-parallel mechanism, the things are getting exchanged here. So, book lungs here are the main respiratory organ in most arachnida. Arachnida is what we are having spiders and scorpions in that class. So, next one is hemoglobin. So, hemoglobin is, hemoglobin as what we discussed, these are all proteinous structure, the protein part in the blood, and since there is no option here, so what we are knowing here, this is not a vitamin, this is not a blood carrier. Actually, blood is carrying RBC, and RBC itself is having high concentration of hemoglobin as a protein. Definitely these are not skin pigments. So, the skin pigment is called melanin. So, melanin is not here. We are talking about hemoglobin. Of course, this question can be altered in some other aspect, that where these are considered into skin pigment. So, melanin is a skin pigment that is giving darkness to our skin. So, similarly, These are not vitamin, not blood carrier, not skin pigment, but these are respiratory pigments. So, the right option is respiratory pigment, but if in case there is no respiratory pigment, people can always ask this question that whether it is a vitamin, blood carrier, skin pigment or protein. The right option is protein, because hemoglobin, the globin is what is standing for protein. Hemo means iron and globin is what we have, the protein part. So, the iron containing protein is what we call hemoglobin, that is present in RBC, red blood cell, that is carrying oxygen. So, this is what we have discussed now. So, we will slowly quickly finish this one. So, the next question here is, which one of the following is related to difficulty in breathing? So, these three terminology: apnea, again A stands for no, dis means for difficulty, difficulty it stands for dis, and then hyper means more. So, apnea, hyperapnea, the terminology is apnea. We can change A with hypo and hyper. Also, we can change it for disp. Dis stands for difficulty. So, dyspnea. Pnea stands for air. Anything pneumonia or any ER stands for air related. So, difficult in breathing, difficult in any kind of breathing is called dyspnea. So, the right answer is dyspnea. Apnea means no breathing, while hyperapnea means more depth breathing. So, these are the three terminology related to the respiratory or the breathing aspect. This should not be confused with hypoxia, because hypoxia is related to oxygen concentration. This is apnea, and hyperapnea and dyspnea is related to breathing. So, the next question here is enzyme carbonic anhydrase, regarding carbonic anhydrase enzyme, and one has to understand that this particular enzyme is reversible in nature, because I have just given some option like lyase is reversible, unidirectional and isomerase, but the right option lyase and isomerase are the two enzymes, unidirectional and bidirectional, these are the direction wide. So, what is happening here, CO2 is combining to water to form carbonic acid by carbonic anhydrase enzyme. Remember, this is a zinc containing enzyme. So, zinc is very important in order to give activity to this enzyme. So, sometimes people can ask that zinc anhydrase is similarly containing zinc as what we have learned in hemoglobin contains iron. So, here the carbonic acid is converted into H plus and HCO3 minus ion. So, HCO3 minus ion is what is there in order to do the carbon dioxide transportation in blood. So, this bicarbonate ion is important, and this is also done by carbonic anhydrase. Now, this whole process is both directional. So, these are all reversible process. One can get both form of conversion by this carbonic anhydrase. Of course, this enzyme is important in order to catalyze this process very fast, because these are required in order to do this process. So, the last question what we will discuss here is regarding the disease aspect. So, what we discuss in the chapter breathing and exchange of gases are various disease conditions. So, which one of the following is related to respiratory system? I have just given an option: jaundice, diarrhea, scurvy and pneumonia, and the right option is pneumonia. So, pneumonia is what we discussed, that any inflammatory condition in lung is associated with pneumonia or is called pneumonia. The first option is jaundice. Jaundice is nothing but the yellowness, yellowing of the whole body. The whole body looks pale in color because of the accumulation of a pigment which is called bilirubin. Now, each and every cell of a human body is having certain finite lifespan. So, suppose we are talking about an RBC. So, a RBC is having mature to death time, there is some lifespan, and that lifespan is approximately 120 days. So, after 120 days, this RBC will destroy and the new RBC will be formed. So, this RBC after destruction is kind of dissociating into various things, and one such molecule which are coming out by the dissociation of hemoglobin is what we call the yellow pigment bilirubin. Of course, we are not going to discuss that thing in detail. So, because of that destruction, the yellow pigment is coming in the body and the condition is called jaundice because of destruction of RBC. So, if there is a more destruction of RBC, the yellowness will increase and the condition is called jaundice. Diarrhea is nothing, if you see the slide, diarrhea is nothing, but this is just increased flow of the digestive system. So, if there is more flow of the digestive system, the content of the digestive system will not be absorbed in a proper way, and the feces which will come out from the body, the undigested food, particles which are coming out in the form of feces will be watery in shape, and that watery concentration is called diarrhea. So, rhea is what we know, that rheology is a science which deals with the study of flow. Any flow in the digestive system we call diarrhea. So, diarrhea is related to digestive system. Jaundice is what we can discuss this one little later, that this is related to liver. But then we have another condition I have just noted down, scurvy. Scurvy is nothing but the deficiency of vitamin C. So, vitamin C deficiency can lead to scurvy. There are another condition where there is a deficiency of vitamin B1 we call beriberi. So, beriberi is what we will have deficiency of less concentration of vitamin B1, which is thiamine. So, these are some of the questions which we have discussed in our text also, and I was just trying to explain you guys in order to see this whole chapter in a better prospect. So, these are some of the very important questions which are related to this particular subject, is this particular chapter, where the respiratory system is quite complex and everything is associated with the normal or abnormal disease condition in human being. So, this is all about the breathing and exchange of gases.